Hello, I am going to be reading Cinderella today. So please listen first, then you can practice reading with me, and then you can try it with the subtitles on your own by turning off the sound. Okay? So today is a fairy tale called Cinderella. I'm sure you have heard about it. There's lots of different versions. So here's Cinderella and the fairy godmother. Cinderella. Long ago, there was a little girl whose kind mother and father were dead. She lived with a stepmother who had two daughters of her own. Her stepdaughter was so much prettier and sweeter than her own children that she was jealous of Cinderella and gave her all the hard work to do, while her own daughters spent their time at parties and entertainments. So here's Cinderella working very hard next to the fireplace and washing the floor. Cinderella had to spend her evenings sitting in the chimney corner. For this reason, her sisters called her Cinderella. Now, the king's son gave a grand ball to which he invited all the lords and ladies in the country. Cinderella's two sisters were among those who were asked. How pleased and excited they were! For days they could talk of nothing but the clothes they should wear and the grand people they hoped to meet. When at last the great day arrived, Cinderella was kept running from early to late, helping the sisters to dress. "Don't you wish you were going to the ball?" said one of them. "Indeed I do," sighed Cinderella. The sisters laughed. "Ha ha ha! A pretty sight you would be," they said rudely. "Go back to your cinders." Cinders are a part of the fireplace, the ashes. Then, stepping carefully into their carriage, they drove away to the ball. Cinderella went back to her chimney corner and tried not to cry, but the tears would gather in her pretty eyes and trickle down her face. "What are you crying for, child?" asked a sweet voice. Cinderella started and raised her eyes. Before her stood her fairy godmother. And here is a picture of the fairy godmother and Cinderella. "I do so want to go to the ball," said Cinderella. "Well, stop crying, and you shall go. Run quickly into the garden and bring the largest pumpkin you can find." So here's the pumpkin. Cinderella ran to obey, and in a few moments was back with a splendid pumpkin. Her godmother touched it with her wand, and the pumpkin became a golden coach. Here's the godmother's wand. "Now, child, quick, the mousetrap from the pantry." "Here it is, godmother," said Cinderella breathlessly. In an instant, at the touch of the wand, 6 fat mice were changed into cream-colored horses. Then a large gray rat was changed into a coachman. So if you can see this, this is the coachman, and behind him is the coach where Cinderella will ride in. 6 lizards from behind the pumpkin frame became 6 splendid footmen. Oh, godmother, Cinderella laughed. It is all so lovely. Then suddenly she thought of her shabby dress. Uh-oh. But before Cinderella could realize what was happening, her godmother's wand tapped her lightly on the shoulder. And in place of the shabby dress, there was a gleam of satin, silver, and pearls. So now she's in her beautiful dress. And she has her necklace of pearls right here. And her hair is all done up pretty. Surely she was now in a dream dress. On her feet were the daintiest of slippers made of crystal glass. Now, child, go and enjoy yourself. Only remember, if you stay at the palace 1 instant after midnight, your coach and servants will vanish, and you will be the little gray Cinderella once more. A few moments later, the coach dashed into the royal courtyard. The door was flung open, and Cinderella alighted. As she walked slowly up the staircase, the king's son hastened to meet her. Never, said he to himself, have I seen anyone so lovely. So here's the prince, and Cinderella's walking up the stairs at the palace. The evening passed in a dream of delight. Cinderella dancing with no one but the handsome young prince. So here's Cinderella dancing with the prince, and everybody behind them is dancing too. He insisted on sitting beside her at supper. The two sisters could not recognize their ragged little sister in the beautiful lady to whom the prince paid so much attention. Suddenly, a clock chimed the 11:15. Ding, ding, ding. Cinderella at once took leave of the prince and, getting into her coach, was driven rapidly home. Here she found her godmother waiting to hear all about the ball. It was lovely, said Cinderella. And, oh, godmother, there is to be another tomorrow night, and I should so much like to go. Then you shall, replied the kind fairy, and kissing her godchild, she vanished. When the sisters returned from the ball, they found a sleepy Cinderella sitting in the chimney corner. And here she is on the stool over in the chimney with her two sisters looking at her. How late you are, said Cinderella, yawning. Oh, are you not very tired? Not in the least, they answered. Then they told her what a lovely ball it had been, and how the prettiest princess in the world had been there. Who was she? Asked Cinderella. That we cannot say, answered the sisters. She would not tell her name. The next night, as soon as the sisters had driven away, the godmother appeared. Once more she touched her godchild with her wand, and in a moment she was arrayed in a beautiful dress. And the coach appeared at the door. She put her arms around her godmother's neck and bid her goodbye. Goodbye, dear child. Enjoy yourself, but remember to leave the ball before the clock strikes 12. But the hours flew by so swiftly that Cinderella forgot her promise until she happened to look at a clock and saw that it was on the stroke of 12. With a cry of alarm, she fled from the room, dropping in her haste one of the little glass slippers. The prince hurried after her, but when he reached the hall, he saw no one but a little beggar maid creeping away in the darkness. So here's the prince and Cinderella running down the stairs, and she lost her slipper, the glass slipper, up here. Poor little Cinderella. She reached home weary and overwhelmed with shame. The fire was out, and there was no godmother waiting to receive her. She sat down in the chimney corner to await her sister's return. When they came, they could speak of nothing but what had happened at the ball. So here are the sisters with Cinderella while she sits and listens. The beautiful princess had been there again, they said, but had disappeared just as the clock struck 12. And though the prince had searched everywhere, he had been unable to find her. He was quite beside himself with grief, said the elder sister, for there is no doubt he hoped to make her his bride. Cinderella listened in silence, and slipping her hand into her pocket, felt the remaining glass slipper. It was the only thing of all her grand outfit that remained. The next morning, there was a great noise of trumpets and a procession, at the head of which rode the king's son. Behind him came a herald bearing a velvet cushion. So here's the velvet cushion and the herald and the procession, upon which rested a little glass slipper. So here's the glass slipper. The herald blew a blast upon the trumpet, hoo, and then read a proclamation. So here's the proclamation being read by the herald. That the king's son would wed any lady in the land who could fit the slipper upon her foot. Of course, the sisters tried to squeeze their feet into the slipper, but it was no use. They were much too large. Then Cinderella shyly begged that she might try. How the sisters laughed when the prince knelt to fit the slipper on the Cinder Maid's foot. So now the prince is trying the slipper on her foot, on Cinderella's foot. What was their surprise when it slipped on with the greatest ease. And the next moment, Cinderella produced the other from her pocket. Once more she stood in the slippers, and once more the sisters saw before them the lovely princess. For at the touch of the magic slippers, her ragged dress disappeared forever. In place of it, she wore the beautiful robe the fairy godmother had given to her. The sisters hung their heads with shame. But kind little Cinderella kissed them and forgave them for all their unkindness. The prince could not bear to part from her again, so he carried her back to the palace. They were married that very day, and in the place of honor sat her fairy godmother. In time, they became king and queen and lived happily ever after. So here is the picture of the prince and Cinderella getting married. and the fairy godmother is by their side. And they lived happily ever after, just like all the other fairy tales do. So remember, this is called the front cover, and Cinderella is the title. And if we flip the back over, we have the back cover. So you can practice your story parts. So go ahead and start practicing your book, Cinderella. Have fun.